For someone who really enjoys turn-based RPGs, I find myself plenty of reasons to rarely play any of them. They make for some incredible games, but in the same breath practically demand to be one of your only genres of choice via an incessant need to be dozens upon dozens upon dozens of hours long, like a jealous date snapping at you the moment your eyes dare to wander from them. But hey, for me, when I get a choice between playing almost 24 different indie games to completion in the same amount of time it takes to do one run of Persona 5 Royal, the choice is fairly clear. Sorry Persona, genre monogamy is just not my thing. That's why there's a niche out there that I love to see games like Echo Generation fill. It's a charming, gorgeous, and fun turn-based RPG that can be completed in less than 8 hours. And while there is plenty to improve upon in its execution, those looking for a more bite-sized RPG experience may find a lot to love here. And speaking of love, we love our viewers and desperately hope you love us back! If you like our videos, please remember to like, subscribe, and check out our Patreon in the link below. And if live streams are more your thing, join Gamer Ghoulfriend every Thursday evening over on our Twitch channel. As for our poll question, do you prefer massive 100-hour-long RPGs or a variety of smaller, more abridged experiences? Let us know in the comments below. Some of you may find Echo Generation to be a familiar name, and that's no coincidence. Echo Generation Midnight Edition is actually a re-release of 2021's version of the same game with some tweaks and touch-ups in many of the arguably right places. So let's start with the basic pitch. The game opens up with an ability to choose a name and basic look for your main character, a media-obsessed youngster growing up in the 90s with your sister, mother, and father who's mysteriously vanished. And while much of the game's plot deals with the search for your father, the actual tone here is one of unabashed silliness from nearly start to finish. If Stranger Things ever got an Airplane-esque satirical spin-off, Echo Generation is up for filling that role, even if its writing is frequently not quite up to the task. This is the first thing I'll touch on but not harp on. The writing here is very basic and presented with a matter-of-factness that all but ensured I never had an emotional connection with any character in the story. In fact, most of the cast, main or otherwise, get no material development whatsoever and settle for being whisked between plot beats without a whole lot of nuance or care. It's fine and works well enough with the game's sense of levity, but makes some of its darker storylines, like a child serial killer loose in the town, feel a little out of place. The writing also loses steam during basic exploration, where you can seemingly inspect a large number of objects throughout town, but without having anything interesting to say about a lot of them. Given the game's clear goal of having its tongue planted firmly in cheek, I don't understand why it gives me the option to interact with a stop sign only for my character to tell me it's a stop sign, or interact with a plant and say, it's just a plant, or interact with a garbage can and say, it's just some garbage. You get the idea. There are some item interactions that do get more exposition than that, don't get me wrong, but in many cases it feels like the game wants to flesh out its lore through exploration and just frequently fails to get the creative juices flowing in a way that makes that happen effectively. Okay, maybe I harped on that a little bit. The plot here is not the main attraction, and is charming enough to get by as reasonably nice window dressing to the gameplay. As I mentioned, Echo Generation is a turn-based RPG, but one presented on a smaller scale and balanced accordingly. You won't be going up dozens of levels and dishing out hundreds in damage points here. In fact, what's here is closer to Paper Mario in style than anything else. Combat may be turn-based, but is also active, with most of your moves being based on comic books you find throughout town and having their own associated minigame. Correctly completing the minigames, which run the gamut from solving puzzles, clicking A when two shapes form together, mashing a button prompt, or playing a quick rhythm section, feels consistently satisfying and gives your attack a proper boost when you do. None are especially difficult, but they require just enough attention to make combat feel more active and a little less like just clicking through menus. Your party will consist of yourself, your sister, and one of several companions, all with different strengths and weaknesses. And though you can't switch between companions mid-battle, prepping before a big fight can help give you an edge depending what comic books you've collected to get the best moves. Gain enough experience from each fight and you'll level up, which allows you to choose between boosting your health, attack power, or pool of skill points each time. Skill points are used for a majority of attacks and are shared between the entire party, which is sort of a double-edged sword when it comes to the game's design. On one hand, if you want to focus on using one character's special skills over another, they can be prioritized accordingly without having their own pool of points to worry about. On the other hand, regeneration of skill points during combat is slow, and the ability to use any of your skills right away means that once you've unlocked enough moves, almost any enemy that isn't a boss will be trivial to fight, as you can just wail on them repeatedly and know their health will run out well before your pool of skill points does. does. Given that skill points regenerate between battles, there's basically no downside to this approach. Thankfully though, the number of basic enemy mobs you fight in Echo Generation versus bespoke bosses is heavily weighted toward the latter. The enemy variety here in general is tremendous, as I rarely fought any given adversary more than a small handful of times before moving on to a new area with new challenges. Bosses pop up almost constantly, and it was nice to see just how frequently the game tried to give me something totally new to fight. That said, very few of these enemies do anything unique, and fighting them mostly feels the same despite the welcome visual variety. Bosses will occasionally have special moves requiring you to dodge out of their way or play a unique minigame, but are almost all easy enough that coming in with full health and a couple of healing items will generally spell victory. This is a theme with Echo Generation's combat, and one worth noting for anybody in search of a real challenge. You won't find it here, for better or worse. I have no problem with an easy, low-stress RPG experience personally, and that's exactly what Echo Generation provides. No grinding, no cheap one-hit kills, and no overly complex mechanics to wrap your head around. Just a fun romp through some pretty environments and unique enemies with a charming enough storyline to carry you forward. If the combat sounds simplistic, that's because it most definitely is, and that comes with some missed opportunities. While I appreciated that every single attack has its own unique minigame, in practice it quickly becomes clear when one attack is obviously better than another in every single way, and you'll soon favor using some of the same ones over and over, leaving your older skills in the dust. Additionally, while the game has status effects like bleeding, radiation, or stun, in practice many of them, if not all, apply almost identically, with just minor variations in amount of passive damage done. I didn't see enemies who were strong or weak to any specific status effects, nor was anybody in my party. You'd think that a giant mech would be immune to bleeding, for example, but you'd be very much wrong. I only say this is a missed opportunity because actual enemy encounters are all very similar, and having each one have different strengths and weaknesses may have added more variety, and given reason to use a wider array of skills. It doesn't harm the combat too much, but does lend it too little complexity to avoid outstaying its welcome as the game nears its conclusion. For those who may have dipped their toes in Echo Generation's original release, I want to clarify some of the changes you can expect from the Midnight Edition and how they've impacted the game. For one, the game now includes fast travel, which is an absolute godsend. I did play a couple hours of the Echo Generation's earlier iteration, and the lack of fast travel was an ugly blemish on the game that frequently wasted the player's time and got me to drop it. It's a great feature to have now though, even though it's arguably not used quite enough. While there are a handful of fast travel points throughout the game, some areas mysteriously lack any and still require a lot of slow walking back and forth. Other updates include more impactful ones like a quest tracker, which was very handy for keeping track of the huge number of different items you're frequently looking for, and smaller things like the ability to tilt and zoom the camera or some combat balancing. For those who played the original release in its entirety, the emphasis on tweaking what's already there rather than adding new content means you don't have much reason at all to revisit this. But for those who never played the original and want to give its best iteration a go, the Midnight Edition is about as objective an improvement as the game could get. Still though, as the game went further on, some elements of its design could still be improved yet. Late in the game especially, the volume of obtuse, annoying fetch quests really tried my patience. There are a huge number of items to collect throughout the game to trade with certain characters for either new comic books to upgrade your moveset or progression of the story, but it's so easy to miss some of these, especially when many involve talking to certain characters or inspecting particular objects multiple times. And, as I mentioned earlier, inspecting objects in Echo Generation isn't the most interesting of activities to begin with, so the game's frequent demand that you search every corner of every location and talk to each character multiple times becomes a total slog if you're not willing to use a walkthrough. One of the later game puzzles, which required me to bribe a character with an item so that he would let me use an elevator, almost broke me, as I had absolutely no idea where this item was, and the solution was to talk to a character I had already chatted with several times in an area many sections away from where I was. I have no idea how anybody was supposed to know what to do there without an absurd amount of aimless wandering, and to say that lack of respect for the player's time puts me in a cranky mood is to word it mildly. I think folks who are hyper-focused on exploring every nook and cranny of their games probably won't have a problem with this, but if you prefer your games more tightly paced, have a walkthrough handy for this one. Trust me. Presentation-wise though, I don't have much to fault Echo Generation for at all. Its colorful voxel visual style coupled with modern rendering and lighting techniques make it an absolute joy to look at, and aside from one very small area in the game, it runs at a flawless 60 FPS on Steam Deck. So, needless to say, it's not a demanding game at all, but for those who try to run it on very low-end hardware, just be aware that there aren't any graphical settings to tweak at all here, just options for resolution, full screen, and VSync. that is all. The music is pretty great too for the most part. Some tracks didn't agree with me as much as others, but I thought most were very good, with the main menu theme especially being a total banger that brings all the right retro synthy vibes to the table. Overall, Echo Generation is a unique, short-form RPG with a great presentation and simplistic but fun combat. I wouldn't blame some for turning their nose up at it for the low complexity and easy nature of its combat or its absolutely painful late-game fetch questing, but the full package is put together with the care and charm that shows it's clearly a labor of love and ultimately amounts to more than the sum of its parts. And thankfully, some of its prior iterations' major frustrations have been sorted out with the addition of fast travel and a quest log, so this is most certainly the best version of the game that it's ever been. Echo Generation gets the Bronze Genie Lamp of approval.